Hi, my name is Mark, one of the pastors at Trillium. Irony seems to me is a big part of life. What's irony? Well, in simple terms, it's words that work against itself, or where actions and words work against each other. So let me give you a couple examples here, a few examples. Here's a picture of a sign on a door that says not to post signs on doors and windows. The message of the sign, and yet works against the very act of it being there. And someone's come along and written about it being ironic, or there's an irony in the very posting of the sign. The next sign shows, or picture shows a sign of perfection, and yet the sign itself is broken, so it works against the very message it's trying to convey. The next sign I really like, always open, and yet in the middle of it, in small words, closed. They work against each other, right? So there's an ironic moment here. The next picture is one of an article about the improving literacy in Mississippi, yet Mississippi is spelt incorrectly. The very headline of the article works against the message that's embedded in it. I love this next one. Thank you for driving carefully. Except the car slipped behind it, and the sign, the very presence of the car flipped over works against the message of the sign. Last one here is this sign not in use. Sign not in use. And yet the sign is in use, telling you that it's not in use. So there's a contradiction in the very message. It's ironic. It's an ironic message going here. I call that gap between the two messages, the two ways of understanding the ironic gap. And I think we live with this gap all the time in life. You know, like the person who complains about people complaining, or the person who criticizes other people who criticize. These situations are ironic. And so it's important for us to recognize them, because I think there's an invitation in them for us to move from one way of understanding to another. The Bible is an ironic book. It's full of irony. And probably the most ironic book within the Bible is the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John is an ironic gospel of Jesus. And the irony is this, that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us and came into the world, and we didn't recognize him. In fact, it says right near at the beginning of John this, the Word was in the world, and though God made the world through him, yet the world did not recognize him. This is a line of irony, the creative force of the universe. The source of all things comes into the world, becomes flesh, and we don't even recognize who it is that's standing before us, moving before us. The source, our source, is before us, and we don't recognize him. The next line is perhaps even more ironic. He came to his own country, but his own people did not receive him. If anybody should have recognized Jesus, the Word made flesh, it should have been his own people, but they're as oblivious to what is before them as anyone else. And we see this notion of irony and these two ways of seeing and what seems to be and what is working against each other throughout the whole Gospel of John. There's a wonderful story in chapter 4 of a Samaritan woman coming down to the well in the middle of the day and meeting Jesus there, waiting. See, Jesus is transiting from Judea and Jerusalem back to Galilee, and he decides to go through Samaria. Most Jews would probably have gone around Samaria. See, Samaria is a land of reprobates and half-breeds, people of tainted, unclean. They were treated with contempt by the Jew, and so many Jews would avoid going through this land, but Jesus is trying to expedite his trip, so he journeys through Samaria, and he's waiting at a well tired by himself. And this woman comes down in the middle of the day, and she's expecting to be able to draw water from the well by herself. And she's surprised when she gets there. It's not that just anyone's there. There's a Jewish man waiting for her there. And so she begins to draw the water up quietly by herself, and he asks her for a drink. And she's surprised. She says to him, I'm a Samaritan, and you're a Jew, and yet you're wanting something from me? See, for Jesus to take something from her is to become unclean, to be tainted by her. And she's surprised by this. Now, she sees the conversation as primarily between a Samaritan and a Jew, but Jesus is going to try to shift her understanding to a different point of view, to help her see differently, to close the irony of the moment, because he's going to want her to see that the Word made flesh is standing before her, and that this is an interaction between God's presence and a human being. And so he says to her, if you knew who God was and what God offers, and if you knew who it was that was before you, you would ask a gift of living water from him, and he would gladly give it to you. And this sparks a whole conversation between them, because she can't see it. She's still caught up in the Jew-Samaritan dynamic. She can't see who's before him, but over time in the conversation she begins to see, and ultimately she recognizes Jesus as who he is. And that ironic gap is closed. And she's changed by it. She's liberated in some way. She's freed from the burden of her life. And I think these ironic moments come to us in life, these moments where there's a gap between what seems to be and what really is. And if we recognize the ironic gap as a gift given to us and an opportunity to move from one way of seeing to another, we are going to be immensely blessed by that journey. The ultimate point of Jesus' incarnation is to help us see as God sees. See, we see from the human point of view, but the gift that's offered to us in and through Jesus is to see as God sees. And if we see as God sees, we are freed profoundly. We are freed to be what we were always meant to be.